welcome. As you know, our congregation is in the midst of a deep dive into the book of Revelations. We have 2 Sundays left. We'll be talking about Revelations this morning. I'm Ruth Johnson. I'm yet and still on the Continuing Education Committee, and it's our group that sponsors these adult forums, among other things. Before I introduce the speaker, I'd like to read a relevant... Can't hear? Is that better? Okay. Shelley was right. I'm not used to putting this right in my face, but here we go. All right. I'm going to begin with a relevant verse from Revelations that we've already read as part of our preparations, but this goes back to Revelations chapter 6, verse 7. When he opened the 4th seal, I heard the voice of the 4th living creature call out, "Come." I looked, and there was a pale green horse. Its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed with him. They were given authority over 1/4 of the earth to kill with sword, famine, pestilence, and by the wild animals of the earth. That's just a hint at what's to come. At the opening of Clint Eastwood's Pale Rider, a young girl in a log cabin reads Revelation 6:7, the verse I just read. Again, where the 4th creature, a pale green horse whose rider is Death, appears. Just as Clint Eastwood arrives in the yard on a pale horse and a black hat. At the opening of the movie Left Behind, people just start disappearing as the world sinks into tribulation, a violent time some readers attribute to the final days of Revelation's story. So films like Pale Rider, Left Behind, Lord of the Rings, The 7 Seals, and more do everything from alluding to revelation. I said this twice, I was going to say revolution. I said this the other day. My psychiatrist friend said, I think that's a Freudian slip, so I don't know what that means. If anyone can help me out with that. Revelation, to parody it, to misrepresent its message, or to give small glimpses into its meaning. So this morning, Phil Quanbeck, and I would say in an act of shameless self-promotion, you may have found this. Just want you to know the Post Bulletin thinks Phil is doing a neat thing with his religion at the movies. Phil, who specializes at the intersection of religion, Bible, popular culture, he's going to talk to us about how we discern both reading and better reading the book of Revelations and the Bible in general, and then how to better look at movies and other things from our popular culture that may talk about what's in the Bible. So, this morning, your very own Zumbro Zone, Dr. Phil.
There we go. Good morning to you all. And isn't this room, as Ruth was saying, in fantastic shape with new chairs and a wonderful sound and video system? Can you hear me in the back? Okay. If I need to reenact some things, just let me know, and I'll do that. Our theme today is Revelation Goes to the Movies. We're not going to look at every single movie. We're going to look at a few selected ones, and then I'll make some mention of a couple TV shows and TV preachers near the end, and things to look for as you watch. And I'm also interested to know what you may have seen that I don't know about, and maybe with some discussion time at the end, people could throw stuff out, and we'll see what else is out there. So I trust you. We're going to look at the way the book of Revelation influences film. I mean, it's a highly visual medium. How it gets quoted, alluded to, sometimes transposed, interpreted, and just become more aware of how that works. And we have some YouTube clips here, so that'll make it fun too. I'm Phil Quanbeck II from Augsburg College in Minneapolis and Zumbro Lutheran. And I have a great companion in Dr. Ruth Johnson, who loves to go to the movies with me. So that makes it all the better. The end of the world, global disasters, tribulation, 666, the Antichrist, right? all that gets thrown into the book of Revelation. Though the word Antichrist never appears in the book of Revelation, that never stops people from claiming that it does. Are you aware of that? It's in the letters of John. The Revelation of John, also known as the Apocalypse, Revelatio, Latin, Apocalypsis, Greek, means to uncover. And it's good to remember that there's no mystical significance necessarily to it. It has to do with a kind of literature that reveals sometimes things that are secret, sometimes it talks about the future. What the book of Revelation does in its main format, as you've heard many times, and we've had just a fantastic series, and your small groups I'm sure have dealt with this, it projects a journey into a heavenly place in an indeterminate future from which the seer, John, looks back upon the time in which he is writing and comments on the situation of people there. So it's a heavenly journey, which is a type of literature that appears in late 1st century BC Judaism and early 1st century BC into 2nd century Judaism, and then into Christian literature as well. The book of Revelation is not the last book written in the New Testament, though it comes at the end of the canon of the New Testament. And at various times, as I'm sure you've been told, it's been in and out of the canon, and currently it's in. Yeah, we'll vote on that. Again, this is some repetition, but to bring us all to speed. Apocalyptic literature, of which Revelation is a representative, portrays a dualistic view of the world. Good versus evil, God versus Satan. It uses concepts of eschatology that are apocalyptic. That is, eschatology refers to the end time, and it sees history as moving to an end. Not repetitively, not circular, but a linear final end. The imagery of Revelation and apocalyptic literature tends to emphasize light and dark. And we get that, night and day. We get that even in the letters of Paul in 1 Thessalonians, where he talks about children of the light and of the day and children of darkness. And so we get overlaps of these apocalyptic themes in other parts of the New Testament. We get demons and monsters contrasted with angels and saints. So we'll get horned beasts, multiple eyes, but even in the heavenly places there are some odd-looking figures. And I won't go into that today. So as I said, this describes a journey into a heavenly future which looks back onto the present, and it looks ahead to God's intervention and reversal of the situation in which the struggling, believing community finds itself in the present. In the case of the book of Revelation, that would be the late 1st century Roman Empire. But again, that has never stopped anybody from transposing, reinterpreting, and repicturing this story in their own time. So, is the book of Revelation a disaster movie? Could be. What do we get in there? Famine, war, destruction, death, judgment, punishment, all the favorite themes of Hollywood. Now, one thing I want to point out, first of all, is that Revelation talks about divine, there is a subtext, sometimes obvious, sometimes implied, about divine agency. Despite the horsemen that come out, and despite the destruction that is brought upon the earth, and I'm going to give you a little heads up here, who's opening the seals that lets them out? So there's this kind of implied that God is ultimately in control, even though the present times may not seem to reveal that. I'll go back to this. You can find a lot of world end info stuff and tying Book of Revelation with the Mayan calendar. It's really an exciting time. First, I want to make a little note about secular apocalypses that borrow from the Book of Revelation. But one thing that's lacking in a secular apocalypse is this notion of divine agency. One example is the film Armageddon. How many of you have seen that? Well, we'll see a little clip of it here. The world is saved by Bruce Willis. And go figure, Ben Affleck and Liv Tyler are the love interest behind, and so the the soon-to-be father-in-law to Ben Affleck sacrifices himself. I'll show you the clip here. But let me just say, Armageddon, biblical word. The word comes to mean kind of destruction. But in the biblical Revelation context, it refers to a symbolic place in the land of Israel that was historically over millennia a place where warriors, where empires fought each other as they marched north and south from Assyria to Egypt, east and west from Babylon to Egypt. And so that's how it becomes symbolic. The movie, it uses the term, but it has nothing to do with the biblical sense of that term. Oh, can I move forward? So in the movie, an asteroid threatens to hit the Earth. Again, there's no divine agency. That's just the randomness of the world in which we live. A team of scientists and oilmen, of course, are sent to explode the asteroid. So human agency and sacrifice saves the world, but there's no divine or supernatural agency. Let me just go back and see if I can... Oh, that didn't work. Well, you know what? I'm going to move on. Another disaster movie was 2012. Anybody see that one? Okay, there are just a few of us. I guess I go to most of these. As you can see, that is the coastline of California being disrupted. As the tectonic plates of the Earth shift, scientists anticipate a dramatic change in the Earth's structure. A link is made to the Mayan long count calendar. You've heard of that, right? Some humans are saved through a highly technological Noah's Ark project hidden in the mountains of China. It is a natural disaster full of human sin and little divine agency and a few redemptive moments. Another apocalyptic, secular apocalypse is Knowing, the movie, starring, Nicolas Cage. Okay, what happened? Anybody see this one? Boy, you just don't get to see enough of that. In Knowing, there is a code. Kind of a savant girl starts writing numbers in the 1950s and just obsessively writes pages and pages of numbers. Later on, Nicolas Cage, in the time capsule, discovers these and realizes there are actually names, dates, and places of disaster events that are going to happen. So he becomes concerned about that. And again, it picks up on that notion that there are numbers that reveal things like 666 and 144,000 and things like that. There is a natural disaster coming, but there is ambiguous external agency, not really divine, but aliens come in some kind of spiritual form. Are they angels, aliens, and they rescue a select group of children from the planet just before it all explodes. So there's this notion of chosenness, rescue, but not really divine agency, but some kind of alien force. Okay, let's move on to stuff that's more relevant to our interest. Some films recontextualize. So I made the point, we have secular apocalypses that sometimes borrow from the disaster imagery of the book of Revelation, but really don't reflect its sense of purpose, justice, and divine agency. Left Behind and the Omega Code take parts of Revelation and put them into a contemporary setting. How many of you have seen the movie Left Behind? Okay, how many have read the book? Okay, a few more.
You turned it on.
The assumption is that Revelation is a prophetic book, and those prophecies are coming true in the present. Now, dispensationalism has an ancient past. This is a scheme drawn, as you all know, Joachim of Fiore in the 14th century. No, I didn't expect you to know that at all. He divided the history of the world into three segments: the time of the Old Testament, the time of Jesus, and the time of the Spirit or the Church. And like most apocalyptic thinkers, he imagined that we were living here. Most apocalyptic thinkers tend to think we're at we've gone through a series of sequences, and we're at the very end. But let me just give you a little background, too, about the notion of dispensationalism that lies behind the Left Behind books and movie. And I say this because it had a huge influence in American popular culture, whether or not everybody in this room read it. The notion of a rapture. How many of you have heard of that? The rapture. Okay. That really arises in the 19th century through, and have you heard this lecture before? The rapture is a concept that the true believers, that there's a sequence of events leading to the end time. And this comes out of the Scofield Reference Bible in the 1830s, and then is adopted by an evangelist in England by the name of John Nelson Darby. And he believed that God would remove the true church before a time of tribulation and suffering, and that they'd be literally sucked away right out of their clothes, as you'll see in a minute. And so it's called the pre-tribulation rapture. Some believe in a post-tribulation rapture and a mid-tribulation rapture. Lutherans don't really deal with that. I want you to know. But the Left Behind series assumes a Darby-esque scenario of a pre-tribulation rapture followed by a time of suffering, which is really a kind of purgatory. If you think of the tribulation as people who are in between worlds try to work out some sort of redemption. The Left Behind movies starred Kirk Cameron, whom many of you fondly remember from that, what, 80s series? What was it? Growing Pains. There you go. Thank you. I'll just play a little bit from that film, if I can locate there. There's my cursor. We're in an airplane.
Me? Where are you? Ma'am, is everything okay?
It's my husband. He's disappeared.
You know what? I bet he just slipped off to the restroom while you were asleep.
Would you mind checking, please?
Okay, sure.
And take this.
Ma'am,
I think he's gone off naked.
I'll be right back.
Honey, have you seen the kids?
Oh, shit.
Where are they? Where are my kids? Kids! I can't find my kids. I can't find my kids.
Okay, do you get the drift? And there are snakes on that plane, too. Oh, no. There was a 1970s movie called Thief in the Night, which had a similar tribulation and rapture theme. And they had a late night talk show, and of course, they invite theologians and from the university to come and speculate as to what happened, which means they were not raptured. Just so you know. But what, you know, here's a problem. A problem. What happens is they take, actually the theme of rapture is not a biblical term, And there is something in 1 Corinthians about, in 1 Thessalonians where Paul talks about the church, being meeting Christ in the air, but that isn't really a Revelation theme. But notice the panic and the fear. And one question is they tend to isolate the fear aspect, because movies like this are made in a sense to provoke one into some kind of worried response. So there is a kind of a different kind of evangelism going on through movies like this. They're seeking to persuade an audience of something. That's a blank frame. A similar movie from a little more recent, The Omega Code. Anybody see this? This again picks up on the notion, and I think it was made by an evangelical Christian kind of producer, but it picks up on themes of cyber influence and interpreting codes. I'll just play a brief clip of this too. There. This is the trailer, and
on the eve of the new millennium,
somebody out there say change. That's right.
the truth about the ancient prophecies is about to be revealed.
There was a picture there at one time.
The warnings that can't be ignored.
Early tests are confirming that the ocean's molecular structure has somehow mutated.
The answer has been waiting for.
I need you to be my spokesman for this new world.
I'll see if I can get a picture here. The molecular structure of the oceans is changing. No, I will. I'm sorry.
Nixon will win by a landslide. I guarantee it. Nobody will vote for a cat. Dick Nixon will not be president. Really? Not this time, for sure. Why not? He doesn't look good on television. Well, the man's running for president, not auditioning for Gunsmoke. General, I'll tell you now, the world is on television. And that's where people will form their opinions. People like me will shape those opinions. I have more than 100 television and radio stations, magazines, newspapers. If you read, watch television, listen to the radio, you're gonna hear what I have to say.
I won't go on too much longer with this. What happens in the Omega Code is that an Antichrist figure is really a media mogul who tries to control all the media around the world. That would never happen, of course. But you can see where movies like this take a kind of a revelation theme where there's this notion of some powerful figure, but then adapt it, transpose it into the events of the current time. The Bible doesn't talk about media empires, but it talks about empires. And so the interpretation is to adapt it into a contemporary context. So some films draw upon a single verse or a theme and then play that out. And this is where we get to A Pale Rider, I believe, as Ruth read. There's no empty chair in this film. How many have seen Pale Rider? It really is a fine film. I really admire Clint Eastwood's work, and believe it or not, I think he's done some really interesting stuff, often with themes of redemption, and Unforgiven would be another one. And even the spaghetti westerns had something of value to them. I will play I think I have a brief clip here. As Ruth read, it starts with a girl in a cabin reading from Revelation chapter 4, the scene where the pale horse, that's King James language, and the New Revised Standard Version talks about pale green, because the thought is that the Greek really intended to capture the the rotting flesh of a corpse, which would be more like that color. And so the modern NRSV translation, I think, captures the sense of the Greek better. Its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed with him, and they were given authority over the fourth of the earth to kill with sword, famine, and pestilence, and by the wild animals of the earth. This notion of being given authority, notice, does it say who gives the authority? The text implies, though, that there is divine agency who is somehow allowing this authority to be granted. I'll show you a little clip and I'll make a comment. Here we go.
Warner Brothers will be proud next great American Western. Clint Eastwood, Dale Ryder.
I'll back up.
They came out of the mountains to ravage a small mining village. Suddenly, a stranger appeared, and hell followed with him.
I'm doing something wrong. Yeah. Okay.
A little bit more intense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have to kill it. Okay. I'm going to try one more time. Ready?
Warner Brothers will be proud to bring you the next great American Western. Clint Eastwood, Dale Ryder. They came out of the mountains to ravage and rape a small mining village. Suddenly, a stranger appeared, and hell followed with him. Some called him preacher, others called him gunfighter. Clint Eastwood, Dale Ryder.
They call him preacher. He has no name in the movie, so he's never given a proper name, but he's described, and he wears kind of a white collar, but notice the black hat, so he's kind of, like the pale rider in Revelation, he executes a kind of justice upon a corrupt influence that is really tearing apart a community. He can't seem to be killed, and he disappears at the end of the film. So he kind of appears and he disappears. And somehow justice is done. So, another movie that draws upon a biblical verse and then elaborates on it, I don't have an extended clip on this, is The Seventh Seal by Ingmar Bergman, 1957. Anybody seen this one? Okay. It used to show on campus all the time along with Citizen Kane. This is a really superb film. It's set Revelation 1 again. It has to do with the opening, and before the seventh seal, there's silence. Before the seventh seal is opened, there's silence in heaven for half an hour. That's the biblical quotation from which the movie draws its title. It's a story of a knight who returns from the Crusades, and this is the film where he plays chess with death in order to stave off his ultimate death. And so it deals with finality, judgment, punishment, some kind of redemption. It's parodied in the Woody Allen movie Love and Death, but I think they play bridge in that movie. But you know, notice the black and white, but it does capture, it doesn't deal with an extensive discussion on the book of Revelation, but it deals with the ultimacy and finality of death. Yeah, Bob?
Stephen Colbert does a segment called Cheating Death.
Oh, yes.
And that is that scene.
Okay.
So he's playing chess with the devil.
I don't have that link on here, but we could do a whole morning on Stephen Colbert and his understanding, which is actually pretty profound. Moving along here. There are some films that draw on archetypal images, more the visual, and not an actual quotation, but that impression, that feeling. Lord of the Rings, I think, is a good example of that. Both the books by J.R.R. Tolkien, who was a profoundly devout Catholic, and with C.S. Lewis, was in a group of writers who sought to bring religious themes into their literature, but to do so in a more subtle way. And the movie versions draw upon the images which allude, I think, to the book of Revelation. One, for example, would be the ring wraiths in Lord of the Rings. Those kind of condemned horsemen, former kings who sacrificed their souls in their pursuit of the ring, and now are kind of on this. They're kind of like the horsemen of the apocalypse, I think. And there's something so archetypal about dark figures riding dark horses, pursuing people through the night. I know that wakes me up in my dreams all the time. And have most of you seen the Lord of the Rings film? Your kids all have. And then there's another figure, Gandalf, in Lord of the Rings, who is first of all Gandalf the Grey, and then is reconstituted through kind of a resurrection, comes back as Gandalf the White. You see that? Not too subtle, the imagery here. And he leads a force, an army to rescue people at Helm's Deep, and he fights the orcs and all that stuff. And that really follows upon I think, an image from Revelation 19, where there is a messianic figure who rides a horse, who has a crown, and who has a name which no one knows but himself. And he leads this notion of a messianic figure leading a triumphant army against what could basically be described as demonic opposition. Lord of the Rings is really written during World War II, and so it certainly reflects the apocalypticism of that era, I think. But again, it continues to play out in new settings. Let's see. I do have a clip here. Oh, rats. No, you don't want that. You know what? I didn't save that properly, so it's not going to link. Just a minute. The History Channel. How many of you have ever watched something on angels and demons and the Antichrist or the end of the world on the History Channel? All right. So do I. I love it. It tends to be overwrought, and I'm going to play a little piece from the opening of a segment called the Antichrist 2. You can't just have the Antichrist 1, you need Antichrist 2. The sequel. There are pluses and minuses to what goes on in the History Channel. They actually draw on some reputable scholars whom they interview, and then they bring in some people who are a couple standard deviations off the mean. But it also tells us that there is a popular interest, right? That this stuff plays periodically throughout the year, and they make it because it sells. And it does do some, here's going to be an example where we have to learn to be a little more informed viewers.
them and fight them to the death if necessary.
From Nero to Napoleon, dictators and despots have always been magnets for those watching out for the Antichrist. In 20th century America, prophecy believers set their sights on Europe, based on a long-standing fear of a despot who would head up a revived Roman Empire.
There will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, and as iron breaks things into pieces, so it will crush and break all the others.
For 2 decades in the 20th century, many were certain that this prophecy had been fulfilled.
Among fundamentalist Christians, there were tremendous amount of fear about Benito Mussolini as the possible Antichrist. Why? Because he had revived the Roman Empire, as Antichrist was thought to be going to do.
But even at the height of his infamy, Mussolini had competition. Among many attributes, Hitler's skill for oratory was seen by some as a sign of the Antichrist.
Daniel chapter 7 predicts this person as having a great mouth, speaking great things. Revelation chapter 13 says it again. Adolf Hitler literally spellbound the Germans. I believe that he was demon-possessed.
One of the amazing things about prophecy belief is its ability to survive counter-evidence. When Mussolini was killed, when Hitler died, writers who for, in some cases, 20 years, in the case of Mussolini, had been identifying him firmly as the Antichrist, simply sort of said, well, oh, never mind, and offered a new scenario.
Prophecy believers have often turned their attention to U.S. presidents in their search for the Antichrist. For them, this passage from Revelation predicts an Antichrist who will use economic coercion to dominate the world.
No one could buy or sell unless he had the mark, which is the name of the beast, or the number of his name. His number is 666.
During the New Deal period, there were certainly prophecy popularizers who saw Roosevelt as the sort of puppeteer, the demonic master. When the Social Security Act was passed in 1935, they said, aha, now we see the true nature of this demonic system, because we're all going to be given numbers just the way the Bible foretells.
Decades later, the number of the beast, 666, led some to seek the Antichrist.
Now we all know that's really about barcodes. Yeah, but actually some of the people they had speaking there, Paul Boyer and the guy from Jewish New Testament scholar, those are highly reputable people, you know, who, and Bernard McGinn, famous Catholic theologian, biblical interpreter on apocalyptic literature. Then they had some other guy in there who gave me a lot of concern. But this is out there, and so how do you sift through? Do you notice how they kind of jump from Daniel to Revelation 13 and then say the beast is the Antichrist? And what you have to watch out for, at least in as you look at some of these things that purport to be documentaries, is that they make great leaps of connection, often without really establishing cause and effect. And then it turns the whole quest into a search for identifying an individual who is the, with the definite article, Antichrist. And is that, first of all, does the word Antichrist appear in the book of Revelation? No. Is the book of Revelation intended to help us identify particular evil people in our time? I don't think that is the purpose of it. It is, though, to portray a picture of the world that speaks in a truthful way about the nature of suffering, of evil, that these are realities, but that there is a deeper reality of a God, a divine agency who speaks and works through grace and redemption, sometimes under the sign of the opposite, not seeking power, but working through weakness. I'll move on a little bit here, and then we'll have some time for questions. I can't go by without talking about zombies. How many of you went to the zombie pub crawl a couple weeks ago in Minneapolis? I didn't. Pardon? Was there one here? No kidding. Oh my goodness. I made the mistake of working. Was it fun? No. Walking Dead on AMC is in its 3rd season, and you're all watching that tonight, I know. There's a fascination with zombies, in part because it's a way of dealing with the problem of life, death, and bodily resurrection. And there's, in the New Testament, in parts of it, a suspicion that Paul deals with in Corinth, where people don't like the idea of bodily resurrection because they, 1 Corinthians 15, where they almost imagine that it's bringing up corrupt corpses. And that's not the world that they find attractive at all. Some have argued that George Romero, who has the Night of the Living Dead series, that he, in some ways, is an updating of Dante and a journey to hell. And it speaks about the anxieties of the present time. Zombies sometimes are created by disease, sometimes by nuclear disaster, and there's a relentlessness. Older movies, zombies are slow. Recent films, zombies run. Just thought I'd let you know. Yeah, they've been working out. There's a great recent Norwegian zombie film called Dead Snow, where a bunch of Norwegian medical students accidentally raise up a group of Nazi soldiers from World War II have been buried under the snow. I won't go into that right now. But there is an interest here, and it does deal with finitude, death, resurrect, and the physicality of life. And zombies, they just pursue. In a sense, they're the ultimate consumers. They don't really do anything. They just pursue, and in some ways, it becomes a metaphor for some critiques of contemporary society. Anyway, I'm not going to show the clip here. It's just kind of gross. But and in Revelation, some movies are allusions to images in Revelation. Just a couple movies I'm not going to go into, but there are 2 movies called The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, one made in 1921. Anybody? That's Rudolph Valentino's first big movie, I guess. And there was a remake in 1957. Both of these are in the wake of major wars. They use the image of the Four Horsemen to talk about the devastation experience of World War I, and in this case, the second film about World War II. So they're not really explorations of the text of Revelation, but they just grab onto that image of the Four Horsemen, which, famine, death, all those things, and the experience of the tragedy of war. And finally, I just thought I'd mention my favorite TV preacher, Jack Van Impe and his wife Rexella. They're on tonight at 11:30 on Channel 9. Every week, anybody ever watch Jack Van Impe? Okay, I do. And you can find him at jvim.com. But Jack is a TV preacher who focuses every week on, he takes selected texts from the book of Revelation and elsewhere. He's memorized 10,360 Bible verses. Memorized them, and he recites them, and he connects then Bible verses to contemporary events. And so this would be an example of someone who takes the book of Revelation and isolates little pieces here and there, finds a connecting word, and then applies it to the contemporary situation, which I don't think is a constructive approach to criticism or to interpretation. But just so you're aware, that's something that a lot of people do, both in film, literature, popular culture. They'll take pieces of the book of Revelation and then extract a lot of meaning out of just a fragment. Pardon? Oh, I'm not going to... You want to hear Jack? No. Sometimes Rick Sellis sings.
Oh, yeah, you could be
Okay. Is it coming up? Okay. And there was silence in heaven for half an hour. I know it's not working. Darn, yeah.
Well, maybe because it's today's show, they're not wanting me to see it.
Oh, that could be. I'll go to last week's show.
Saturday.
Oh, was it?
Beyond the grave, yeah.
Could be a sign we're not supposed to see.
I think so.
Yeah.
Go back here.
From the heartland of America to every nation on earth, this is Jack Bentley Presents the Truth in News and Commentary. Here now are Doctors Jack and Rexella Vanappi.
Hello and welcome to Jack Vanappi Presents. Today we're going to be discussing some very unusual things. The first one is something that is a record. The skydiver makes highest jump ever. We're going to be talking about who did it and how fast he was going and all the rest. And this certainly moves my heart. The pension crisis looms despite cuts. Then going on, President Obama downsizing the military, and could we have dire consequences? Oh dear, we will talk about that. Let's get back to this. Australian pilot skydiver Felix Baumgartner set a world record for the highest parachute jump. And as I said, I could not believe my eyes when I saw him. Skydiver makes highest jump ever.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, the good part is when Jack starts, see if I can advance it. Oh, it's gone to black. Yeah, there you go. Oh well. 11:30, yeah. No, this is moving too slowly, but you can get an app for your iPhone. A few concluding remarks. Revelation has visually powerful images. I could also include the woodcuts of Albrecht Dürer, the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, and his apocalyptic imagery that were part of the Reformation art. They didn't have movies, they didn't have film, but they had woodcuts in the beginning of printing. The images of Revelation are recontextualized. So empires now become, ancient empires become modern empires. Ancient weapons of war become modern weapons of war. And so some of the recontextualizers try to draw one-to-one connections between chariots and tanks and things like that. Filmmakers often pick up on just a portion of the book. Maybe the end times scenario, maybe the numerology, the number 7. There are a bunch of movies with the title 7 in them. Or 666, there's a whole set of movies that allude to 666, and it's just a reference, and the filmmakers figure that you will draw a connection, but they don't really pursue the meaning of that. I think Pastor Vern has talked about how that really gets interpreted. Or the number 144,000. which is not meant to be an exclusive number, but somehow more an expansive number. But again, this fascination with numbers sometimes appeals to, let's say, the notion that there are secrets being had or hidden codes and things like that. And I think though there is a code language in the book of Revelation, I think this notion of a really obscure and hidden code is a distraction from the overall message of the book. So what's neglected? The message of grace and redemption, in my experience, is often left out. Not always, but in a lot of these films, they ended up being more frightening than reassuring, more despairing in the vision sometimes than offering a vision of hope. That's not to say they're not interesting. Some of them are really good. And it's not to say there isn't a social critique that we can get out of them too. Anyway, that's what I have to say this morning, and I'm sorry some of the clips didn't work, but thank you very much. And I'm happy to entertain questions, but thank you for coming. Paul. Apocalypse Now with Marlon Brando. Well, Martin Sheen's career went on. Yeah, Apocalypse Now with Marlon Brando, Martin Sheen. How many of you have seen that? That's kind of a Vietnam-era film about a journey into Cambodia based on Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. Yeah, I'm not sure why. It was kind of using the notion of apocalypse, not in a religious way, but in the sense of a collapse of a world. Marlon Brando's, created a world in rural Cambodia, but and Vietnam was kind of collapsing around it too. So that's what I think, how I read that. There isn't a sense of divine agency, but there is a moral human struggle as people are trying to somehow find good in the midst of what's evil. And then the movie gives us great lines like, "I love the smell of napalm in the morning." Yeah, and then the Wagner, the Ride of the Die Valkyrie. Yeah, right. Again, there's a musical quotation that's taken out of context and given kind of an apocalyptic meaning, which it might have had in Hitler's Wagnerian Germany as well. Any other questions? Are you going to go see, what's the latest time traveling movie? Looper, and then Cloud Atlas. Yeah, it looks good. I want to go see that. Yeah. Anyway, well, thank you for coming, and I appreciate your attendance and participation.